Thank you. Thank you. So, I'm going to spend about 15, 20 minutes chatting about, hybrid and multi-cloud. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, give you a little background. I've been in this industry for about 20 years, working in and around New York in various roles. Started out as a developer, field tester, business analyst. Spent some time working at Bank of America, Chase. Also developed an aptitude for sort of agile practices and became a DevOps me. The last 5 or 6 years I moved into more of an architecture role, and I'm at Google now in a customer engineering supporting real estate, finance, and some small, medium-sized B2B companies. So that's sort of my thumbnail, who I am and, why I hope to be able to share some valuable insights. One of the things I wanted to talk about, oftentimes, this isn't a sales pitch. What I'm hoping to do today is to sort of share some experiences using a couple case studies from, various clients. In my experience, most companies don't start out wanting to be multi-cloud. Usually, what you find is that they have a primary cloud, or the traditional moving to, have a cloud strategy, and, life happens. Things force you to change your strategy. Anthos is a very popular platform for allowing you to do a variety of different things. It's an open source platform supporting hybrid and multi-cloud. It has some automated features for, some of your CI/CD practices, as well as configuration management, as well as some operational capabilities. But again, many cases, when you look at clients today and organizations, that's a big bite to swallow. You don't bite the whole, the whole elephant. You eat it one at a time, is what I was told when I first started out. And in many cases, that's how, in my experience working with different clients, that's how it happens. First off, the question is, why do you even want a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud? Often you're forced to do that, either because you have traditional data services or other cloud services that have to be run in one cloud or on-prem. You might have regulations and other things that are forcing you to do that. So when you start looking at, why, it helps you target the specific capabilities that you want to show in a multi-cloud. So when you think about, I'm going to just sort of walk through a quick case study. This in this particular example, I worked a couple years ago with this mid-tier company. It was about $10 billion in annual sales. Earlier they had chose Google as their primary cloud provider, and they had a very distributed SRE team supporting 100 plus apps that provided the services that they owned. They weren't interested in moving to any cloud other than Google at the time because of the skills that they had. Also, there were certain services they found valuable. Again, this is not always the case. There's many cases where maybe AWS or Azure might be the chosen cloud, but in this case, it was Google. So what happens? So first off, they had a series of acquisitions that, in each of these acquisitions, after being, sort of acquired, they ran into some challenges integrating the development teams. They lost resources from development and operations that forced them to, sort of maximize capabilities and try to use what resources they had more effectively. The acquisitions weren't all Google Cloud. They had a variety of different on-prem and or services that they attempted to first migrate, and in some cases they weren't able to because they had lost some talent in some of these organizations when they were acquired. So that so in order to not lose velocity developing new features, they had to run as is for many cases, that kind of thing. And some of the other things that they ran into was operational overhead. So in terms of this SRE team grew slightly, but over the course of a year and a half, the work tripled because of the different clouds, DR strategies, things like that. So that led them as well as various development and DevOps tools that they suddenly acquired and had maybe in some cases no knowledge of. So that's sort of where we're at with this particular client and why they looked at Anthos. And again, they didn't look at the whole thing. They wanted to target specific, capabilities. So if we take a look and say, well, why Google? Why Google Anthos? It started out because, again, in this particular scenario, they had three or more different development, development environments and roads to production, which led to some problems and some miscues as they started integrating the business solutions, and the back office development tools weren't integrated tightly, so that when they did releases or they did updates, sometimes they ran into problems where websites weren't properly updated. Some of the data hadn't been cleaned. They weren't able to do a lot of the testing. So, one of the things they wanted to do was sort of have a sort of single plan, develop, and op type approach, which Anthos allowed them to do. It gave them capabilities with GitOps to, provide some of the configuration as well as the development in place. It also allowed them to manage configurations across multiple clusters. When you think about some of their strategic strategies going forward, oftentimes clients, and in this case, cost wasn't a big factor initially, but when you think about some of the strategic priorities driving, driving business in general, it often is related to establishing a secure posture and security, faster time to market, and high quality of service. Many tools and capabilities can provide that, different approaches. Anthos is just one among many. But what they found in this particular scenario was that because of their existing capabilities with Google GKE, because they could not only build new clusters but attach to existing clusters, they saw some value in that. Over time, they also started looking at logging and monitoring and centralizing on development tools, or for that. But that actually wasn't fully in scope for Anthos. They used other tools for that. But when you think about why people are going to multi-cloud and what some of the challenges related to multi-cloud, it really comes down to people, process, and tools, right? So, when you have multi-clouds, obviously the applications have some variations, things like that. But, the road to there, whether you're using off-the-shelf open source CI/CD tools or customized tools, when you have multiple versions of them and teams that have to manage them, you run into barriers because of the tools or the capabilities they're using. So this particular company, one of their goals was to build a distributed team where it could follow the sun, from a DevOps and an operations standpoint. And in order to do that, they wanted to standardize on a set of capabilities, a set of tools, and then use Anthos to help with the operations related to that. When you think about what Anthos is, talking a little bit about, architecturally, the goal is to provide a developer experience that spans all the clouds. So the developers don't necessarily see the differences between deploying to an AWS or deploying to Azure or Google. To some extent, they're agnostic. Underneath that, you have, shared services teams or operations teams that have requirements related to governance, security, and operations that need to ensure that the applications being deployed are secure, ensure that, there's security being taken account across, all of the different clusters. So, one of the challenges this particular client ran into was, like midway through our journey, so we started the journey with one cluster, as a pilot prototype. And we spent a lot of time making sure we understood their use cases and their road to production. And then we tried to replicate that. And obviously we ran into some differences because as we went to the different clouds, we often found some of the assumptions we made when we started with GKE weren't valid for, say, a EKS or the Azure cloud as well. So we backed off on governance and security. So we started out thinking we could roll the whole practice out, and we ended up focusing on operations first. Going in with making sure that we had a good policy-based enforcement in terms of what could and couldn't be done in the clusters. We included development and staging as a part of this rollout, which allowed us to grow our skills. A key adoption principle related to Anthos is making sure that the underlying operations teams have a good foundation in their own practices. And so this helped out a lot by doing that type of crawl, walk, run approach. And in terms of when you look at Anthos, as you see on the screen, it can support many of the top tier cloud services, as well as some on-prem and even bare metal, which is new capabilities in VMware. So what we found is, in our case, we didn't have bare metal or VMware, but it allowed us the flexibility, because as I mentioned before, this particular client was on a acquisition spree, so to speak. They had acquired three companies in the first year, and they were looking at 2 or 3 more. And so it became less of a burden or concern worrying about technology adoption related to the underlying platform, because they were already on the road using Anthos. Again, in some cases, in another case, I had a client where they, for one use case, it was primarily because they had a large footprint in AWS, a smaller footprint in Google Cloud, and he really just wanted to be able to have a single pane of glass, to be able to gather data in terms of logging, to look at some of the operations related to the apps, because it was shared across Google and AWS. And so they implemented Anthos, for a single footprint from a DR type of a strategy. So when you think about why, I'm going to skip this slide. When you think about the architecture, or just walk through a little bit of the architecture related to Anthos, the key thing is that Anthos is also agnostic. You're coming in from various sources, so you can do variety. You can use Cuddle, you can use Terraform, you can use the Google Cloud command line, or a browser to access the Anthos console. And the Anthos console gives you the ability to see all of your clusters, to manage and keep track of all of the logging and operations, as well as to enforce security and other policies as well. With that, you can then use it to manage, again, as I mentioned, AWS as well as Azure clusters using REST API calls. Again, there's some security that is set up as we establish and either build clusters or connect to it. But the key thing is you're given a simple view of your world, especially if you have multi-cloud. In the case of hybrid cloud, we also have an approach as well that's not shown here, but we also are able to see, and depending on whether we actually created the cluster or not, we may or may not have the ability to do certain operations like creating nodes or creating new clusters, depending on how we were set up and what the security policies are. I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions so far as I continue on.
Well, let me, it's Ron Gerber here. Let me just check to see if we've got anyone has any questions. No, I don't think so. Let me ask the people in the room. Anyone have any questions for Reedy right now? Okay. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
Well, I have a question for the audience.
Sure.
How many of you are working in an environment where you have a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud approach going on? I can't see the room, but, could you do it like show of hands?
Yeah, we've got a couple of hands, but probably about 25% for our live attendees. And if people want to comment either in the chat or the Q&A online, you can let us know what it is. I'll give you my own personal take, and it's interesting to see the evolution. We've been promoting cloud solutions at our events for about almost 10 years now. And it's interesting to see the strategy that GCP, the Google Cloud Platform, has adopted. Anthos is one of the key elements of that. And as you can see, it's very much multi-cloud oriented, very software oriented, because, again, you look at the market shares, the two current market share leaders are AWS and Azure, and GCP is rapidly gaining number 3. Quite honestly, there's no one else. But I think it's why GCP has had so much success is because of Anthos. They recognize that GCP has to coexist with so many of these other players. GCP brings so many of its own powerful resources to bear. They have 9 business units that have over 1 billion users each that they have to service, from Gmail to search to Android, et cetera. And they've got a wealth of expertise. And I think that's why GCP has been successful in clearly eliminating anyone else. There's really no one else outside of China beyond the big 3 now who can really do what they do. And I think that's why Anthos is so critical, and why I asked Reedy to focus on this subject, just as everyone, be it virtually or be it in person, is looking at their strategies, looking at their billing, always wanting to keep their options open. That's why Anthos has been well received, because of this flexibility it's offering organizations. Anything else you want to add to that, Reedy?
No, I think that, thanks again. Again, I wanted to get a sense of the audience and where they're at. In my case, in my scenarios, with clients, again, a lot of clients are not, they're being forced to consider multi-cloud. That's not their first choice, right? And I've had 5 or 6 different clients, that I've worked with over the last couple of years, looking at multi-cloud and sort of, on the edges, so they looked at things like observability, the ability to have an SRE team be able to quickly troubleshoot, across multiple clouds. That became, very important to, for one of my clients, because of the need for DR as an example. So, being able to see some of the, the aggregate logging, monitoring, tracing, being able to, use some of the capabilities to do traffic and route traffic between multiple clouds in a case of, managing like a high availability type of network, were, 2 of the key capabilities. Things that are still, clients are still trying or looking at is managing a multi-cluster, multi-cloud, applications. Oftentimes what we see or what I've seen is, clients choose a specific cloud to run a workload or an application on, and then have it relate back to other applications that might be on other clouds. And not necessarily take the step or, of having, one application spanning multiple clouds, spanning multiple locations, things like that. That still seems to be something that, a lot of companies are striving for. Again, the ability to have security as a standard across multiple clouds seems to be something that's becoming much more prevalent, as well as policy management and enforcement to make sure that the security policies and other business standards that are being set are being enforced by, across all these clusters, maybe using a single command. In many cases, that's the where I'm working on, where we're prototyping with POCs and doing pilots for our clients. Those are the types of things that we see coming in next. And then where it comes with service mesh, we're also seeing some use of that for load balancing reasons as well. But as I mentioned, it's a crawl, walk, run approach. when you look at Anthos, when you look at multi-cloud. In many cases, we're seeing the reasons, regulations also driving the need to have multiple clouds to ensure certain or ensure certain clusters are being managed separately. Data is flowing back, and you're having the ability to, extract out the application data, but have the operational data in a single place. So we're seeing things like that as well. So I'm going to stop here and again ask any questions from does anyone here see a need in the next 12 months to move them? Is anything forcing your organizations to consider moving to a capability like Anthos, or are you still able to do what you need to do by having your separate clouds being managed independently?